Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of online programs from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York. It's time for another virtual Voices of the Game. We do greet you wherever you're watching from today. We hope you're doing well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. I work in the education department here at the Hall of Fame. But the main reason that you're tuning in today is to hear our guest as part of our virtual Voices of the Game series. His name, Chuck Morgan. Chuck has been the public address announcer for the Texas Rangers almost continuously from 1983 to the current day. He also serves the team as executive VP of Ballpark Entertainment. He did spend one season with the Kansas City Royals before deciding to return to the Rangers. And this is pretty amazing. Just this past season, Chuck worked his 3,000th consecutive game doing the PA. He has not missed a single home game, either for the Rangers or the Royals. 3,000 plus games. It's now 3,000 games and counting, an incredible streak. And we're very glad to have with us from the Texas Rangers, Chuck Morgan. Chuck, congratulations on the milestone. We do thank you for being with us. How are you doing now a few weeks after the season came to an end?
Bruce, I'm doing great. It's an honor to be with you today, and I can't tell you what this means to me to be a baseball fan and worked in baseball a long time, and to have a program with the National Baseball Hall of Fame is a real honor. But doing good after the season's over, and I'm, just like any year, I'm getting ready for the next one.
November is always a tough month for me because baseball has come to an end. It's one of the darker months of the year. Spring training is still a ways away. I sometimes struggle with it, even though I, of course, work here at the Hall of Fame, and that keeps me busy. Do you have a similar struggle after the World Series, after the season comes to an end? Is this a tough time for you at all?
Yeah, because I'm a baseball fan, and once, maybe for about a week, I'm glad that the season's over so you can kind of recharge your batteries. But being a baseball fan, like most folks, I start missing base. I'm already missing. I'm ready to go again. I'm ready for pitchers and catchers to report. So it may be for about a week, but then I'm ready for games to start back. I enjoy the games a lot.
Let's begin, Chuck, by talking about this past World Series. You, of course, did the PA for all of the games at Globe Life Field, the neutral site ballpark, for the 2020 series between the Dodgers and the Rays. What was it like, Chuck, doing the series this year under these strangest of circumstances we've never had before?
Well, I tell you what, it was, number one, it was a lot of fun. I mean, first of all, Major League Baseball selects our ballpark to be the host for these games. And so that was a big honor. And then the second part of it was, you want to do your best to take care of the World Series because it's so important. It's memories, it's players' memories, it's fans' memories. So you want to do a good job obviously for baseball, and then obviously for your franchise because we've been selected to do this. But I'm going to be honest with you. I hope we don't ever have to do that again. And it's not because I didn't like it or find it interesting. I just would like for everything to get back to normal. And I think the World Series needs to be, and I think the home fans need to experience that in their ballpark. That's why I say I don't want to do it anymore, because that means we'll be back to normal and things will be the way they're supposed to be. And Dodger fans or Rays fans can enjoy World Series games in their ballparks. But, when we were told we were going to be having the World Series in our park, then I said, okay, we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to make these teams feel as much at home as possible. And but it was a lot of fun, and it was very interesting, and I enjoyed it.
With the ballpark at about a quarter capacity, and of course these games and the ALCS games, or the NLCS games, I believe, were the only ones that had any kind of fan attendance this year. It's hard sometimes watching on TV to get a sense of the crowd noise, especially this year because a lot of teams were using the fake crowd noise. But even during the World Series, I'm not really sure how loud the fans were. I heard there were more Dodger fans than Rays fans. what kind of feedback did you get from the fans? What kind of atmosphere did it feel like for you?
Well, we got a new ballpark and we really didn't know, we had 30 regular season games and then the NLDS, and we really didn't know what our ballpark was going to sound like. One thing that we learned about this place is it's going to be very loud. I mean, again, like you said, we only had 11,000 people in here at the most, and it was very loud. In fact, after the second or third game of the National League Championship Series, we stopped playing the enhanced crowd noise because the crowd was so responsive to what was happening on the field, and they were very loud. But that's one thing we learned about our ballpark, that when we get back to having games where we can have 35, 40,000 fans here, this is going to be a very loud ballpark and a huge home field advantage for the Rangers. But man, I tell you, the Rays fans and even Braves and Dodger fans were so loud and responded to what was happening on the field. I think they were happy to see baseball. And I will tell you this, Bruce, it was, when we first opened the doors to the first game of the National League Championship Series, it seemed kind of weird for about 15 to 20 minutes that fans were actually going to get to watch a ball game in person. And but man, it was really loud, and the fans were just fantastic for all of the postseason games played here.
Chuck, I've done some lower level PA announcing in the minor leagues. I've broadcast in Oneonta, which is about 22 miles from here in Cooperstown. I used to do the PA for the Utica Blue Sox. I lived in Utica for many years when I worked at a radio station. Oftentimes, you have a relatively empty ballpark. I always thought those were brutally difficult games to do the PA when you had no fan reaction to what you said. Same problem for you?
Yes, probably the most difficult year. This year was the most difficult year I've ever experienced. But you know what, Bruce, I kind of looked at it as the same thing I say about fans from time to time, that the most important person in the ballpark is the guy that paid to get in to watch the game. And it's up to me or up to all of us to make sure they have a good time and not to mess up their memories. But, we had 30 games plus the NLDS without fans. So I just kind of said to myself, you know what, it's important to those players down there that they have a memory of playing Major League Baseball, and we don't want to do anything to mess that up. So we do our best we can to make those players feel like everything's just as normal as possible. But, having whoever would have thought that we would have had a season without a crowd, that the ballparks are built for fans to be inside, and without them, I told everybody this was the first year of our place, and it really didn't feel like home until you get those fans in the ballpark. So, but you're right, that it's very difficult to work a game when there's not a lot of crowd. But you gotta say, hey, you know what? There's some memories out there we got to take care of, and we're going to do all we can to do that.
I've heard about Globe Life Field and that it's enormous, it's massive. And just look at the public address announcer's booth here. It almost is like an apartment. This may be the biggest PA room or booth I've ever seen.
Yeah, it probably is. And what you can't see in that photo is I've got an office that's part of that. So, yeah, it's very nice. And like I told you before, when the architects talked to me about the space and what we wanted to do, and it was a guy named Fred Ortiz with HKS Architects, and I told Fred a story. He asked me about my memories of PA announcers, and the one that I grew up with is a guy named Charlie Jones, who was the PA guy for the Cardinals even back into the days before I think the systems were electrified, and he would sit right behind home plate, and same way with Pat Piper at Wrigley Field in Chicago. They would step onto the field before the systems were electrified and announce down the lines with megaphones of who was up to bat or who was pitching. And that's pretty much that all I told Fred Ortiz about. Even as a kid, when I would go to Busch Stadium 1, Sportsman's Park, I would see Charlie Jones sitting behind home plate. Once they electrified him, they just left him there. And that's pretty much all I told them. And they knew how much I like to interact with baseball fans. I love to talk baseball with the fans, and I've got a pretty good relationship with a lot of fans here in Texas, and they knew I like to do that. And that's kind of why they put me on the main concourse, and I'm kind of in a bubble. And it's very neat. And, I got to tell you, Bruce, it's a great place to come to work. I don't know if you can really, this is kind of work. It's masqueraded as having a lot of fun. So, but I'm in a great spot. It is a great place to come to work, and I can't wait to visit with Ranger fans once we can have fans in the ballpark.
No blind spots on the field for you, Chuck? You can see everything?
The only thing I can't see, Bruce, are high pop-ups. So when I see a pop-up go up, I don't know where it's going to come down, but that's okay with me. This is really a great spot.
Yeah. Chuck, we want to talk about your very generous donations just come in last week. This is a microphone that you have used as the Texas Rangers PA announcer, and it's now part of the Hall of Fame's permanent collection. It's being accessioned by our collection staff, catalog, that sort of thing. We'll have to wait and see exactly where it goes from there, but it is here, and I know that we're excited to have it. I wanted to ask you, though, is this a mic from recent days with the Rangers, or is this from earlier? Is this an older mic from your earlier days with the franchise?
This is a brand new microphone. It was installed probably around February or March of this year for the new Globe Life field. And it's the microphone that I used for the 30 regular season games, multiple exhibition camp games that we had. And then also it was used for all of the postseason games, the NLDS, the NLCS, and then this was the microphone I used for the World Series. And this was the microphone that I used for my 3,000th consecutive game.
I noticed some PA announcers, they like to hold the microphone. Others, like me, prefer to have it in a stand. They have it stationary. What's your preference?
I've got it in a stand. It's, I like to keep score sometimes. Also have a lot of other things that I'm shuffling around with. So I like to have it on a stand and I've got a great, when I went to Yankee Stadium and met Bob Shepard, he had a foot pedal. And since I met Bob Shepard, I've always had a foot pedal. So I've got a foot pedal that keys the microphone, but I like to have my hands free and then use that foot pedal.
Interesting. I've never worked with one of those.
Very easy to
years since I was in radio. I wanted to ask you, Chuck, who first approached you about the possibility of donating this microphone?
John Blake, our vice president of communications, called me one day. John's a great baseball man, does a great job for the Rangers. And he called me and said that the Hall of Fame had requested the microphone. And, that being a baseball fan, Bruce, like I said before, is just for the Baseball Hall of Fame to want something like that. That's a great honor. And I'm glad that the Baseball Hall of Fame has that microphone.
I understand, though, that this did create a problem within your family because your wife is involved in purchasing the new microphone for the Rangers.
Yeah, she's the senior vice president of finance for the Texas Rangers, and I tell everybody that she's the reason that we went bankrupt in 2010. But Nolan Ryan kept her around anyway. So, but she's the one you have to go to if you need to make a purchase. And she said, "Why do you need a new microphone?" And I had to say, "Well, the old one's going to the Baseball Hall of Fame." So reluctantly, she said, "Okay, we'll get the money for a new one."
Yeah. Think about that for a moment. Here's a personal item that you used throughout this historic season. Now it's permanently part of the Hall of Fame. Obviously, we're all mortals. We're not going to be here forever, unfortunately. But the idea with collecting artifacts for the Hall of Fame is that these items will be here perpetually, year after year after year. Putting that in perspective, thinking about something from Chuck Morgan's career being a permanent part of the museum, what does that mean to you?
I'm not so sure I have words that can describe that, Bruce, because I've been following the National Baseball Hall of Fame ever since I knew anything about baseball. I can remember as a kid when Jackie Robinson was inducted. That may be the first, my first knowledge of the Baseball Hall of Fame at a young age. And I mean, just every year I've followed that and I've just been a follower of the Hall of Fame. I was there in 1994 and just a great place. But to have something that, and man, I collected baseball cards as a kid and anything. My life was always baseball. And to have something like this in the National Baseball Hall of Fame is, I really don't have words to describe it. It is such a huge honor, and I'm very proud of that.
So it's been 26 years since you were here. We're going to have to remedy that sometime in the near future. I know you don't want to miss any home games. You got to keep the streak going. But during a road trip in 2021, we need to get you up here.
That sounds good. And, the thing about that, not missing any games, is that I had a choice. I was one of my good friends and one of our great players, Ivan Pudge Rodriguez, was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2017. And the day he was being inducted, well, we had a ball game where we had another player who I think has punched his ticket for there is Adrian Beltre was going for his 3,000th hit. And I told all of our employees that were going to the Pudge induction, I said, you know what, you're going to miss Adrian Beltre's 3,000th hit. And sure enough, it happened on that date. But, wow. I would love to come up there and see. I haven't seen Pudge's bust and plaque. I'd like to see that and some of the Nolan Ryan stuff. But I look forward to coming up there.
Chuck, let's go back in your career to some other events. And, this one brings a smile, I think, to both of our faces. There was a television show aired on, initially on CBS. Then it aired on syndicated stations, I believe, on the weekends, called Hee Haw from 1969 to 1993. And this is a show, I guess it's hard to explain if you weren't there, if you haven't seen it. I did see it. I didn't watch it every week, but I certainly watched it occasionally. You were involved in this program. For our younger viewers who have no idea what Hee Haw was about, tell us about the show and what exactly your involvement was.
Well, there's another old show, another old comedy show that was on in the late 60s called Laugh-In. And I guess the best thing you could say is that Hee Haw was the country version of Laugh-In. Mm-hmm. And Hee Haw was a collection of there were a lot of great country music stars on there, and then some other characters that we all came to know. My involvement came. I worked for WSM in Nashville, Tennessee, and WSM, part of the Grand Ole Opry, Opryland Hotel, and a big production studio, and somewhere along the mid 70s to late 70s, Hee Haw was produced and put together in Nashville, and they would tape twice a year in June and October. And so I used to always have Sam Lavello, the producer of Hee Haw. I had him as a guest on my radio show. I did the late night trucking show on WSM in Nashville, and we covered about 35 states at night. Clear Channel station. That's where the Grand Ole Opry became so famous. And Sam would come on and talk about Hee Haw coming up for the year, what they were going to be doing in the tapings. And then he would bring some of the guest stars of Hee Haw over, and we would visit. We'd have like a Hee Haw week in June and October. And one night Sam just said to me, "Hey, Chuck, you ought to come over and get some overalls and we'll throw you out in the cornfield." So I went over there and taped several shows. I was on about four shows. You got to look quick, but I was in the cornfield and got to do some jokes with people I grew up watching on TV. George Goober Lindsay, remember him on Andy Griffith? Sure. And then I also did some jokes with Buck Owens and then with Roy Clark. And I happened to be one of those shows that I was taping was there's Buck and Roy now, picking and grinning. But I did a show that Sammy Davis Jr. was a guest star on Hee Haw for 1 week, and I was on that particular show. I got to meet Sammy Davis Jr. and spend some time with him. But it's a great thing to have a part of your life. And anywhere I go and speak, and they they find out I was on Hee Haw. It does get a few laughs from some of the older folks that remember what Hee Haw was, but it was a great time. And, you know, I remember as a kid growing up in Marion, Illinois, every Saturday or Sunday, we were watching Hee Haw. And it was funny. I tell everybody that to be a kid that was 12, 13, 14 years old with Hee Haw on, and then 10 years later, you're standing in Hee Haw's cornfield. That was pretty special.
I'm trying to remember because it's been a while since I've seen tapes of the show, but didn't they go to the cornfield for like a quick one-liner, a quick joke? There might be 3 or 4 people interacting, and then it would cut back to another segment. Was that how it went?
That's how it went. And, you know, what a lot of people don't know is Hee Haw was one of the first shows ever put together by a computer. And I think they did that somewhere out in California. But yeah, I would stand. I think my first joke, Bruce, had something to do with I crossed a gopher with an elephant, and then they would say, "Hey, what'd you get?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but I got some awfully big holes in the backyard." And Bruce, that's quality comedy that you can't find nowadays on TV unless late at night you're watching Hee Haw on RFD. But yeah, that you're exactly right. That's how they would do the cuts to the cornfield.
Very nice. You mentioned a name, Sam Lavello, and I was told by our Vice President, John Shestakovsky, that he is related to Torey Lavello.
Yeah, I didn't know that Sam had a son that played baseball when I was in Nashville, but yeah, his son is Torey Lavello, who had a playing career in Major League Baseball and is now the manager of the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I didn't realize that about Sam till I found out about Torey Lavello later when I had moved into Major League Baseball.
Wow, it's amazing. It's a large world, but sometimes baseball makes it seem a little smaller. I want to talk about these two guys on screen. They were the longtime hosts. Buck Owens left the show early, but I think Roy Clark was on there from start to finish. And I do remember seeing on YouTube a bit where I'm not sure if Roy was interviewing you or he was talking to you, so you got a little camera time with him. Tell us about these two guys, what they were like. Let's start with Roy Clark.
Roy Clark, one of the most talented people I've ever met in my life. Great performer. Had some hit records. Very nice guy. And again, like I say, growing up as a kid in Southern Illinois and watching Roy Clark on TV, and then to stand with him in a cornfield on Hee Haw was pretty special. The same thing with Buck Owens. Buck Owens was part of the California country people, and it worked out in Bakersfield and had a lot of great hit records, and another great and funny guy to be around. But again, it was an honor to get a chance to work with people like this. And you know what was great about my time in Nashville, Bruce, is I got to work. I got pretty much anybody that was a country star between in the mid to late 70s to early 80s. I either interviewed or did some shows with, and it was really a great time of my life. And really those times really set me up for my work in baseball. Some of the things that I had to timing wise and learning a lot about radio and television and things like that. So Roy and Buck were great people to work with.
I remember Roy as being a real jokester, laughing, smiling a lot. I don't remember Buck quite as well. Was he more of a straight man?
Buck was more of the straight guy. Every now and then he had a one-liner or two, but you're right. Roy was more of the jokester. Buck was more of the straight man.
Right. You mentioned a few moments ago, Chuck, about the Grand Ole Opry, and you worked for that. You did the announcing for the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. For those of us who are listening and watching today and have never experienced this firsthand, I never have experienced it firsthand. What is that old Grand Ole Opry like?
Well, you know, the first thing I don't think people realize that they've never been there, that it's a radio show, and that's how it started out back in the mid 1920s, 1925. And in fact, the call letters WSM stand for We Shield Millions. At that time, it was started by the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. and they started the Grand Ole Opry to actually sell insurance back in the day. But the Grand Ole Opry is a radio show, and for years, all of the greats of country music have appeared on the stage. And again, to be a part of something like that, and to get to introduce people on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry and read live commercials for Martha White flour and cornmeal and things like that, just a huge honor and a great thing. And it was a lot of fun. And the most interesting parts of those, Bruce, were the Fridays and Saturday nights was being, the way the announcers worked. We would work anywhere from a 15-minute to 30-minute portion of the Opry that were sponsored by different sponsors. And the time you had between your times you had to work and announce, you could go back and sit around in dressing rooms and listen to little jam sessions and hear stories. And, to be around people that were around Hank Williams and Patsy Cline and things like that, that's pretty special to get to be a part of something like that. But it was a lot of fun and really a great part of my life.
And it's all done live.
It's all done live. And it's like I say, it's on the radio. It's on WSM, and live commercial readings in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people in the Opry House, and then good Lord knows how many are listening at home. But again, it's all done live. It's a live radio show.
I have to guess you're a country music fan. Do you have a favorite performer that you got to meet at the Opry?
Probably the closest person I had to me and was Marty Robbins, who had a big hit back in the early 60s with El Paso. And Marty and I probably did 50 to 100 hours of interviews together. I mean, Marty was a guy who didn't sleep very well at night, and he lived in Franklin, Tennessee. And sometimes to kill time, he'd come up and spend time with me on the radio. It was almost like he was a guest host. And, Bruce, I've told this to a lot of folks. Marty's passing probably played a role in me coming to Texas to work in baseball. That Marty and I were very close friends, and when he passed away, for the longest time, it felt like I was missing something at night on my radio show, and the opportunity came along to move to Texas, and I think Marty's passing played a role in that. But Marty Robbins, and I interviewed Waylon Jennings a lot. Barbara Mandrell, and one of the current members of the Grand Ole Opry that's now a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, Ricky Skaggs. I was one of the first to play some of his music, and I was at an event not long ago in Nashville, and Ricky credited me with helping him get onto the Grand Ole Opry, and so it was a very special time of my life. But Marty Robbins was probably the closest friend I had.
I have to ask you about a guy, not that he was necessarily a favorite singer of mine, but I liked his acting. I thought he was very funny. He starred in those old Smokey and the Bandit movies, Jerry Reed, and I understand he was a big baseball fan. Did you ever meet him?
Oh, I met Jerry Reed and did 2 or 3 interview shows with him
Really?
On the radio. And then Jerry was also one of the owners of the Nashville Sounds when I did the PA for the Sounds. So I knew Jerry, and
Wow.
we also had Conway Twitty was one of the owners, and Richard Sturban of the Oak Ridge Boys was one of our owners. But Jerry Reed he was a funny guy, great interview. And in fact, he did a private showing of Smokey and the Bandit before it was released in the theaters. And I got to go to that private showing, and that was pretty cool. But Jerry Reed was a great guy and very talented guitar picker and great performer.
His characters in those movies were very likable, very funny, and it sounds like it was kind of a reflection of him in real life.
Yeah, he was pretty much being himself in those movies.
Yeah. Another guy that you got to meet through the Opry, a man who's still with us, and a guy with also a connection to baseball, the great Charlie Pride. On the left is a photo of Charlie from the 1950s. He was a pitcher in the Negro Leagues for the Memphis Red Sox. Then later, he used to go to spring training with some major league teams. He did that in the early 70s with the Brewers. I believe he did it with the Texas Rangers. But you've gotten to know him very well.
Yeah, Charlie. In fact, Charlie still goes to spring training, and one of the highlights of spring training is Charlie will do a kind of a concert in the clubhouse for the Rangers, and he's always worn 05. He has his Texas 05 uniform. But yeah, I first met Charlie back in the late 70s in Nashville, and interviewed him multiple times. Did a couple of live shows with him at the Opryland Hotel where I entered. He was the guest star, and but great guy to talk to. Has a lot of great stories, not only about country music but also about his time as a ball player in the Negro Leagues. In fact, he was an all-star pitcher in the Negro Leagues, and Charlie's a guy now, Bruce, that we can call. I've had him come out to back when we were in the World Series in 2010 and 2011. He was one of my choices to sing the national anthem before the games of the Texas Rangers World Series games. And then we had him come in this year for the opening night game here in Texas. He sang the national anthem. But he's a great guy and got a great stories. And I spent about an hour with him in 2011 before Game 6 of the World Series, which was one of the worst nights of my life and one of the worst nights of Charlie's life, the way the Cardinals beat us there at the end. But Charlie is a great guy and again, a very talented people. And that's where I've been very fortunate, Bruce, to hang around a lot of very, very talented people. The only problem is none of it rubbed off where I could sing or write or anything. So, but they're all great people.
My understanding, though, is that Pride was a pretty good pitcher, and I think he pitched after the Negro Leagues. I think he was in somebody's minor league system for a little bit.
Yeah, he was, and he was a good pitcher, and but I think he got the call to sing some country music, and he's done pretty well there, and he got a great honor last week at the CMA Awards, the Lifetime Achievement Award. But yeah, he was a pretty good pitcher.
I'm amazed he still comes to spring training. I didn't realize he still did that. Is he still making records?
I don't know if he's doing any recording anymore. I mean, he can still belt out "Kiss an Angel Good Morning," and he can still he can sing the national anthem as good as anybody can. And but again, just a great talent and a great guy.
And he still follows the game very closely, I imagine.
Oh yeah, he's one of the Rangers' minority owners right now, and he's still involved in baseball. So. He is a baseball fan.
Yeah. Let's stick with this Nashville theme for a moment, because this is very interesting. 1978, you kind of switched course a little bit. You started to venture into the area of announcing baseball after having done the Grand Ole Opry, and you became the public address announcer first season for a new team called the Nashville Sounds. And here's the great coincidence. Just last week, we had Chuck Goggin, a former major leaguer, Vietnam veteran, on the program. And Chuck was the manager of the Sounds during their first year as a franchise, 1978. So the two Chucks got to know each other pretty well.
Yeah, I told my wife this morning I had seen that Chuck Goggin was on, and Chuck was the first manager of the Nashville Sounds in 1978. The ball club was started by a man named Larry Schmidt-O, who brought me to Texas. Larry was the vice president of marketing for the Rangers and had left Nashville. You know, Larry's dream was to one day bring Major League Baseball back to Nashville. But Chuck Goggin was the manager of the Nashville Sounds in 1978. We were a Cincinnati Reds affiliate, and we won the title in 79. And I did 3 years there in Nashville on the PA, and we had a great team in 1980. We became affiliated with the Yankees. We had Steve Balboni at first, and Willie McGee was the center fielder, Pat Tabler, the third baseman, and a guy that I've known for a long time, Buck Showalter, was our outfielder, right fielder, and designated hitter. So there were a lot of great players on that 1980 Nashville Sounds team.
Wow, that's great. Any idea that Buck was going to go into managing?
No, I didn't have any idea. I mean, I always thought he was going to be a great player. He led the league in hits and did a great job for the Nashville Sounds. So, yeah. But I didn't know he was going to go into managing.
Wasn't he called Nate back then? That's his real name? Didn't he go by Nate rather than Buck?
No, I always introduced him as Buck Showalter,
Okay.
but his real name is Nathaniel, and I think they do call him Nate from time to time. But I always introduced him as Buck.
Well, that was a heck of a team. You mentioned Tabler, Balboni, McGee. I mean, McGee had a great career, albeit in St. Louis, not one of the trades the Yankees want to remember from the early '80s. What was the ballpark like in Nashville?
You know, it wasn't a bad ballpark. It was a typical minor league park to start out with, and it seated about 7,000-8,000 fans. And there were times that we did such a great job promoting there that they'd have to put fans on the field and rope them behind in the outfield. But it was a nice ballpark, and I worked there before they had the guitar-shaped scoreboard, but it was called Greer Stadium. And but it was a good place to watch a ball game. You know, Larry Schmittou is a good baseball man, and he pretty much designed the ballpark and did a great job with it. And it was a lot of fun to work for the Nashville Sounds.
Now, Chuck Goggin mentioned on last week's program with us, he is part of a group that is trying to bring a major league franchise to Nashville.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I didn't know Chuck was part of it, but I've seen that they've been working for that, and I think they've got a working title of the team of Nashville Stars. And you know, I think Nashville would support that. I think it'd be a great thing because the fan. You know, we had great attendance when we had the minor league team there, and I know they've got a brand new ballpark that's not that old, and but it's a great market and a lot of baseball fans there.
Here's a story I really like. When the Nashville Sounds were affiliated with the Yankees, turns out there was a game where Bob Shepard couldn't announce. I don't know if he was ill or he had some other commitment. You actually got the call to do the PA announcing at Yankee Stadium. Tell us about that.
You know, there's times in your life that you get major butterflies. And that's one of those, you know, like before the World Series this year, I had some pretty major butterflies. I mean, shoot, Bruce, when I first did my PA when I was 15 in Marion, Illinois, and working for baseball cards, I got big butterflies there. But tell you what, you sit in that chair at Yankee Stadium in 1979. You know what, the way that came about, Bob was okay. Wasn't anything wrong. What it was is one of the Nashville Sounds fans had approached George Steinbrenner at a meeting when the Sounds first became affiliated with the Yankees. Hey, our PA guy's pretty good here. We think he can do a better job than your guy. And he said, well, and George Steinbrenner said, well, let's find out. And so the next thing I knew, I was on my way to New York to call a game in 1979, the second to last game of the year. It was on a Saturday afternoon. They were playing the Blue Jays, and man, Bruce, they had Reggie Jackson in there. I mean, all the great Yankees of the late 70s. And really, and I ended up seeing what was really funny about the game is I saw Ron Guidry play center field because it was the next to the last game of the year. I think Guidry just wanted to play center field. But, you know, I went to the ballpark on Friday night, went to Yankee Stadium on Friday night because I was really nervous and I never had seen Yankee Stadium before. And I mean, walking up to the place was just magnificent. And then I'm sitting in a booth on a Friday night and look over to my right, and there's Phil Rizzuto and Bill White. And I grew up a Cardinals fan, and to see Bill White, who was a great first baseman that I admired for years when he was playing for St. Louis, and then to meet Phil Rizzuto. And then I met Bob Shepard on Friday night, and I talked to Bob, and he said, well, what's the plan tomorrow? And I said, well, you tell me. And he said, well, I tell you what, you can come in and do the lineups. And if everything's working fine, he said, I may just go home. I said, okay. So I came back on Saturday afternoon game, and Bob introduced me as the announcer for the Nashville Sounds. And I sat down in Bob's chair and I did the lineups and did a couple of promo announcements. And Bob looked at me and he said, you think you're going to be okay? And I said, yeah. He says, well, you know what? I think I'm going to go home and take a nap. So after the first inning, Bob left. But I tell you what, to get a chance to visit with Bob Shepard, it's like opening an American history book or a Yankee history book. And all of the things that he'd participated in and the players that he had met. really an invaluable experience. And one of the things that I'm very proud of, and to actually do a ball game in Yankee Stadium.
That must have been nerve-wracking, though, to do those announcements with Bob Shepard right next to you. I mean, that's tough.
Yeah, that's not very easy to do. I mean, I've done some things in my lifetime that make you a little nervous, but to have Bob Shepard over your shoulder while you're reading a promo announcement, or even the starting lineup for the New York Yankees, that's pretty intimidating.
Well, you obviously did well, because he left and said, we're in good hands here. So 1983, you move up to the major leagues, Texas Rangers. How'd that come about?
Well, I had a lot of things going on in Nashville, and Larry Schmidho had called me in December when Larry first became a vice president of marketing with the Rangers. He called me in December and asked me if I was interested in joining him in the major leagues, that he was taking a job with the Rangers. And I at first turned him down because I had so much going on. I had just been named the Country Music Association Disc Jockey of the Year by the CMA. I was on a nationwide network of 100 stations. I was also there at the startup of the Nashville networks. I was hosting a couple of shows on there. So I had a lot of good things going. And I got to thinking about where I was going to be when I was 50 years old, if I'd still be playing records. Little did I know that records would be extinct by the time I was 50 years old. And then also, the loss of Marty Robbins, really, like I told you before, really had an impact on my life. And with all of those things that I thought about, I called Larry back in around February and said, you know what, Larry, I think I'd like to work in the big leagues with you. And so one weekend, Bruce, I'm introducing Barbara Mandrell on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. And about 3 weeks later, I'm introducing Buddy Bell playing third base for the Texas Rangers. And, I always loved baseball. I mean, as far back as I can remember, in my hometown of Marion, Illinois, where we grew up watching guys like Ray Fosse, I've been a baseball fan and playing wiffle ball in my backyard. I used to do Harry Carey and do the PA all at once and play wiffle ball. And so to be in the big leagues, to be a part of Major League Baseball, it's been very rewarding. And, I love watching these games. So it was a very tough decision, but it's been a great decision for me.
The 83 Rangers, while they didn't make the postseason, had some brand name players. They had Jim Sundberg, Bucky Dent, Mickey Rivers, Danny Darwin, Dave Stewart. You mentioned Buddy Bell. Thinking back to that time, it's hard to believe that's, my goodness, almost 40 years ago. Do you remember who was the first batter that you announced for the Rangers?
I think it was number 3, Wayne Tollison. I think that's who led off that game. Our first ball game, Bruce, is interesting because, the Rangers hadn't had a very good year in 1982. And then we were up against the Phi Slamma Jamma University of Houston on Final Four that night. And we only had 13,000 people in the ballpark. But, you never forget that first ball game. And we ended up winning. A guy out of Tennessee, Mike Smithson, was the winning pitcher. And but to see, I always liked to watch, even when I was a kid, to go to a ballpark, and you don't see much of it anymore, is to watch a big league team take infield. And I can remember that first night watching the Chicago White Sox and the Texas Rangers take infield. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And I'm getting ready to announce these guys. We had a good ball club. We started out pretty well, but we kind of faded at the end. We ran into trouble from the Tony La Russa led Chicago White Sox back in 1983. But that was a big thrill to do that first game. But big part of my life to be a part of baseball.
The 83 Rangers had a very colorful manager, the Red Rooster, Doug Rader. You must have a few stories about the Rooster.
Yeah, Doug Rader, he was a great. I remember watching Doug Rader as a kid playing for the Astros, and he did a good job with the Rangers. And Doug was not a whole lot about talk, but I remember we were getting ready to sell some suites that we were adding on to Arlington Stadium. And one of my responsibilities was to sell those suites with another guy you're probably familiar with, was Bobby Bragan. Bobby Bragan and I were selling suites for Arlington Stadium. And we brought Doug Rader to speak to a group of folks that were clients that were, or to be clients. And Doug Rader said, "Okay, we're adding these suites, so cough it up. Good night, everybody." That was about all he had to say. But and then one time there was some debris blowing around down by the dugout, and Dave Stewart was pitching for us and had just given up a home run, and we were behind. And Larry Schmittou came in and said, "Hey, you need to call down there to the dugout and tell them to clean up that debris." And I go, "Now?" And he says, "Yeah, I think now it looks pretty bad down there." So, I didn't call right away because I thought, what if Rader answers the phone? And then Larry says, "Are you going to call him?" So I picked up the phone and I said, "Hey, Doug, there's some debris down by the dugout. Have you got somebody?" And about the time I said that, all I heard was click. But now Doug was a great character, and they did a great job managing the Rangers for a couple of years.
Over your nearly 40 years with the Rangers, a lot of different managers that have come and gone. Was there one guy in particular that you really became friends with, a common bond that developed? Any one or two names that really stand out?
Probably Johnny Oates. And Johnny Oates had managed in Nashville. He knew where I came from, and he knew I was a baseball guy. And so Johnny Oates, and the other thing, the great thing about Johnny, Bruce, was that Johnny was the first manager that took us to postseason. So he'll always have a special place for not just me, but for a lot of Ranger fans. But over the years, I've had to work close with a lot of managers, obviously with Buck Showalter, because Buck and I go back to the days that he was a player, and Jeff Bannister and I got along pretty well. And I always liked Ron Washington. Wash and I got along because he knew my friend from my hometown, Ray Fosse, that did the color analyst for the Oakland A's when Wash was with them. But I've always had a good relationship with managers. Bobby Valentine, in fact, I saw Bobby spend a little time here at the World Series just recently. But I've always had a great relationship with the managers that have come through here.
Chuck, I remember when Johnny Oates was a backup catcher with the Yankees, and the New York media, they talked about how this guy is going to become a manager and going to become a very good one. And he had some success early in his career, and then sadly, much like Dick Hauser, developed a brain tumor and passed away at a very young age. I really think Johnny Oates would have been, I don't know if he'd been a Hall of Fame manager, but I think he really would have left a mark as a manager. I thought he was very sharp, and just he seemed to have a lot of the personality traits that you look for in a good manager.
Yeah, I know the one thing that I've talked to a couple of players, one especially Rusty Greer. Rusty liked Johnny because Rusty knew the day he was driving to the ballpark what he was going to be doing, that he pretty much used the same lineup every day. And, he handled pitching staffs real well. He was just a good baseball man and a good guy. But I know Rusty liked the fact that he was going to be in that lineup every day, or knew what he was going to be doing when he got to the ballpark.
Yeah. In our 10 minutes remaining with our guest, Chuck Morgan, we want to take questions from the audience. And you can type your questions right into the Zoom group chat, which we like to refer to as the chat box. We have a question already from Stephen Sankner. He writes, Chuck, when a visiting team comes in for a series, are you provided with the correct pronunciation of names? Do you experience any difficult names where you have to double check them?
Yes, and yes. And it's changed a lot over the years. When I first came into the big leagues, they didn't have what they have now. Major League Baseball does a great job. They send out the pronunciation sheets about a month before the season starts. It's a great tool to have, and it's got the phonetic way to announce the name. Very, very helpful. But the best thing that I've ever found is is to make sure we're all on the same page. I like to go up and visit with Eric Nadel or Dave Raymond, our TV and radio guys, I've become friends with some of the road announcers now, and I'll even go to if it's a visiting team, I'll go to the road TV or radio guys just to make sure we're pronouncing the name the way the guy would like the name to be pronounced. So it's not as hard as it used to be. It's you still don't want to make that mistake, but every now and then there are a couple of names that'll get by you. There's still a lot of times that my wife could attest to this, that I'll kind of whisper the name under my breath to make sure I've got it right before I step on that foot pedal to make sure it comes out right. But it's a lot easier today than it used to be.
Any particular names, Chuck, especially for opposing players, that really gave you a lot of trouble? Not that you didn't really know how to pronounce it, but just a lot of syllables, a lot of consonants. It was just hard to get out. Any names jump to mind?
Man, Bruce, you're giving me more credit than I'm worth. Sometimes it's guys that only have one syllable that are tough. But I can remember the ones that make you the most. I guess you get the most butterflies are the ones you don't check out before the game starts. And I can remember the one that really I had a problem with was Shigetoshi Hasegawa from when he was with the Angels. And it's just one I didn't check out before the game. But nowadays I make sure we check every one before we get going. I worried about one during the World Series, or actually during the NLCS, was Randy Arozarena. I mean, I'd heard that different ways. I watched a lot of the games before he got here. And, the other thing you have today, Bruce, that you didn't have before is that you've got this fabulous thing called the internet with YouTube, and you can go on there and you can hear how names are pronounced either by the broadcasters or by watching some of their highlights. But I was a little worried about Randy Arozarena, but I got that one going. But it's a lot easier today than it used to be.
Bob Shepard was once asked his favorite name to announce, and it was an opposing player, never played for the Yankees, Sandy Valdivielso. He felt that was a very lyrical name. Did you have a favorite name like that?
I don't know if I've got a favorite one like that. I've got Juan Gonzalez. I used to bring Juan Gonzalez. I had that one, and Pudge Rodriguez. But, Bruce, my favorite name to say, because it always got a big roar. In fact, people didn't hear me say the end of his name was Nolan Ryan, because before, and I'd say pitching for the Rangers, Nolan, and about the time I'd say Nolan, the crowd would roar so loud you never heard me say Ryan. So,
it's interesting you bring up Ryan, and I just thought of this question. He, of course, pitched 7 no-hitters, and I think, 3 of them were the Rangers?
2 with the Rangers.
2 with the Rangers. When a pitcher pitches a no-hitter, we know that obviously the play-by-play announcer announces that. But when something like that happens, a no-hitter or a perfect game, do you, as the PA announcer, do you verbally acknowledge that, or do you just keep quiet?
I keep quiet. In fact, I'm up here doing things. I'm as superstitious as anybody. I'm up here making sure I don't do anything out of the ordinary that might mess the game up in any way. I remember this is a funny story, maybe not that funny, but Kenny Rogers was hurling a perfect game at Globe Life Field in 1994. And I looked out on the left field scoreboard. We had a sports ticker out there that carried information of games from around the country. We had yet to figure out how to disable the information for our game. So I looked out there in the 5th inning of that perfect game, and I saw California versus Texas, Rogers perfect through 5 innings. And I thought, oh God, we got to get that fixed, because I was scared to death somebody was going to see that and it was going to bust up the perfect game. So we finally figured out how to disable it. But no, I try to do, I don't want to mention anything, and I'm trying to do stuff to make sure I'm not doing anything to mess up that game in any way.
But not even at the end of the game when it's done. You don't say anything.
End of the game we would. We announced, hey, that Nolan Ryan's just hurled his 7th career no-hitter. Yeah.
Okay.
After the game we would.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Alan. What was it like pretending to be the home announcer for both the Dodgers and Rays in the World Series?
It was a lot of fun, but I will tell you this, that it was a a difficult thing to do because there were no off days, especially in the NLCS. So we would go from Dodger home game to Braves home game overnight. And MLB had done another good job of creating these signs that we posted up in my booth and in the scoreboard room, reminding us who the home team was. But I only had one close call. It was the Braves and the Dodgers. It was a Braves home game, and the Dodgers were in a rally situation, and the crowd was into it. And I went, number 14, second baseman, Kike Hernandez. So I had to I went from home team guy to visiting guy in seconds, but that was a difficult thing to do. And but again, that World Series and the all of the postseason was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Question from Thomas Smith: what was your favorite baseball moment that you've ever been a part of as a broadcaster?
That one's pretty easy. The Rangers' first pennant to invest emotion and passion into a franchise, and they win an American League pennant for the first time. It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, that's the ultimate thing. And you've done, you've had to, you've sold program ads and fence signs and promotions and just been involved in all types of things for the franchise. And to see Neftali Feliz strike out Alex Rodriguez to win a pennant, that's my biggest moment. But, again, Bruce, I could sit here, you and I could go for another hour of the great moments in my seat that I've seen. Perfect games, Nolan Ryan stuff, Kenny Rogers' perfect game, Adrian Beltre's 3,000 hit. There's all kinds of those, but to win the pennant was the biggest thing.
Sure. Question from Terry Vasquez, who's one of our regular viewers. Chuck, you mentioned you enjoy watching infield practice. Do you have a favorite infield practice story to tell us?
Probably at Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, being a kid and watching, you hear Harry Carey on the radio describe the play of these guys. And then you're actually sitting in a seat in that ballpark and you're watching Bill White at first, Julian Javier at second, Dal Maxfield at short, Mike Shannon or Ken Boyer at third, Brock Flood or Mike Shannon at right or Roger Marison right, to watch those guys with McCarver catching take infield. That is something I can still see in my mind today. And to see a major league team take infield is pretty special. I love to watch the major league infielder with the crow hop throw the ball into home or to third base. I used to love Bruce. There's some games I would just focus on Curt Flood in center field to watch him. But as a kid, watching those teams take infield and then know that maybe in 2 or 3 days you're going to be taking infield, and it didn't look anything like that. But I love watching those teams take infield.
We should mention Chuck did grow up in St. Louis, and Harry Carey was his favorite broadcaster growing up.
Well, I actually grew up in Marion, Illinois, which is about 120 miles from home plate. So another great place to grow up, and I just had a great life growing up, Bruce, with Cardinal baseball and watching Ray Fosse play in high school, things like that.
So that was a fairly long commute to those Cardinal games.
Yeah, but back in those days, the games were a couple hours, and I was very fortunate. My mom and dad loved pitching, and so I got to see a lot of Bob Gibson games. I got to see a lot of Gibson against Koufax, Gibson against Marichal, stuff like that. So if my dad would get the paper in the morning and check that pitching matchup, and if it was a good one, we were on our way to Busch Stadium.
Yeah. All right. Last question from the audience. We have it from Mike. I know about how certain pregame songs, music either appease or irritate home and visiting players and managers. Do you have a particularly good story about how your selection of music might have done that?
That's another thing I did for years, Bruce. I gave it up this year. I used to play the music at all the Ranger games. And, the one that I think probably upset a player the most was, I think, Jared Weaver. We had knocked Jared Weaver out of a game, and we played Hit the Road Jack, and he was singing it. I was watching him sing it as he walked off the mound. Another another music story that I've told a lot is the Kevin Kennedy, when he managed the Rangers. He called me from the road. The Rangers had a big inning in Yankee Stadium. And right after that inning, a commercial played on the video board at Yankee Stadium that featured Frank Sinatra singing Fly Me to the Moon. So Kevin Kennedy called me and said, hey, after every win this year, I want Fly Me to the Moon. So we did in 94. Well, about 4 or 5 years later, Kevin was managing the Red Sox. And Kevin, as we were wearing the Red Sox out one night, and he'd out to make his third or fourth pitching change. I thought, oh, what a great time to serenade Kevin with Fly Me to the Moon. So I played me a little Fly Me to the Moon, and I got a nice tip of the cap and one finger salute from Kevin Kennedy. So for Fly Me to the Moon. So,
I've heard stories, Chuck, from some of the PA announcers. They get requests from players, but the songs have curse words. You can't play those. I mean, that's got to be a difficult situation.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. The thing that we've been fortunate nowadays is that you can get the clean versions of those songs. That doesn't solve the problem when kids go home to download them, but we can get the clean versions, and most players are very aware that that we're a family friendly atmosphere here at the ballpark, and they know that, so they're pretty good about it.
Yeah. You think back, any musical requests that were really kind of strange? They weren't popular songs or rock and roll songs or country songs. Anything that was a really weird request from a player?
The one that comes to mind is David Delucci. When he played for us, did a great job for us when he was here. And David Delucci was struggling a little bit and at the plate, and he called me one day and wanted to hear the Godfather waltz from the movie The Godfather. And I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah. And, sure enough, I mean, we played it a couple of times, and he caught on fire and ended up having a pretty good year. And I think it was but always would get a great reaction from the fans when he would come up to bat. But all of that's changed so much. It goes back to those days when the organist used to play something to do with their name or where they're from. And of course, nowadays they start hearing walk-up music in youth leagues. So by the time they get to the major leagues, it's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, it's become more complicated, no question. Chuck, this has been a lot of fun talking baseball, talking about your career with the Rangers. Chuck Morgan, not only the Rangers PA announcer, but the man who handles ballpark promotions as their executive VP. He invented the dot race, which became very popular in Arlington, and is still done to this day. I guess they actually have live dots that come out on the field, and that all started with Chuck as well. We really appreciate your time. We hope to hear from you on time, late March, early April, with the 2021 season.
Bruce, this has been a real honor and really great to talk baseball with you. And like I said, we could probably go 2 or 3 more hours, but what an honor this has been for me. And I really appreciate the National Baseball Hall of Fame for having me on today. And I really appreciate the job you did, and really thankful for this. And I appreciate it very much.
Well, certainly an honor for us. We do appreciate the donation of the microphone, which is now part of the permanent collection here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Again, we thank Chuck Morgan for joining us on our virtual Voices of the Game program. And we thank all of our listeners and viewers as well. We hope you've enjoyed it on what has turned out to be a snowy day here in Cooperstown, New York. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Have a great day.